Hello, and welcome to the Intro to Houdini course. Houdini is a comprehensive 3D package, and it's really best at doing dynamic simulations. Things such as particles, fluids, smoke, fire, these are all things that Houdini is really great at. Now this class is designed to cover Houdini in broad strokes. We're going to learn almost everything that you can do with the software. Week to week, the topics will change pretty quickly, but it's all designed to make you familiar with everything Houdini has to offer. By the end of the class, you'll be comfortable working in Houdini, doing modeling, simple simulations of fire, particles, and destructions, and modifying attributes to drive simulations the way that you want them. In this first lesson, we're going to get familiar with the interface and learn how to navigate through Houdini. And we're going to do that, we're going to start by making a box. So if you see the box icon in the upper left of your screen, just click it. Move your mouse to the center of the screen and click once more, and you'll place the box. Now here at first, I just want to introduce a couple of camera movements that will help you navigate through the viewport and view your models and simulations more easily. So if you hold down the Alt key and click the left mouse button, you can rotate your camera around the scene. If you hold the Alt key and hold down the right mouse button, it will let you zoom the camera in and out. If you hold down the Alt key and hold the middle mouse button, it will let you pan the camera around the scene. Now there's a couple other really useful hotkeys for moving the camera around that don't involve the mouse, and these are used to sort of snap the camera to different places you might want them to be in the scene. The first one is if you hold down the space key and then hit the F key, the camera will focus in on the object that you currently have selected. If you hold down the space key and hit the A key, it will view all of the objects in the scene. Now, right now we only have one object in the scene, so we're actually not going to see anything different than when we hit space and F to focus. Finally, though, if you ever get your camera kind of twisted around or lost or rotated in a kind of funky way and can't really see where you're at in the scene, if you hold down the space bar and hit the H key, it will snap the camera back to the home position, which is the default position for the camera anytime that you launch Houdini. Now, we've been working mostly in the viewport here right now, and the viewport is one of several panes that we have in Houdini. And all of these panes are just the different groupings of UI elements that'll help us do different things. So I want to take a couple moments and introduce the other panes that you can see here. To the right of the viewport and up here on the top, this is the parameters pane, and this shows all of the properties of the current object you have selected. Right now we have this box object selected that you can see listed up here, and we can just sort of start changing numbers around and watch the box change accordingly. So for instance, if we change the value of the X rotation here from 0 to, let's say, 25, we'll see that the box rotates in the X-axis. Now, we can also change parameters not just by typing, but also by middle mouse clicking and dragging left and right. As you can see, as I drag the mouse left and right, the camera rotates along the Y-axis. Now, certain parameters, such as scale, oftentimes we're going to want to keep the X, Y, and Z numbers all uniform instead of changing them one at a time. So instead of typing each individual box or middle mouse dragging each individual box to get where we want it, we could also just hover over the word scale, for instance, middle mouse drag, and then it will let us change all the parameters uniformly. If you want to change it by really drastic amounts, you see that there's different orders of magnitude if you move your mouse up and down. So we could change the scale by tens every time we move the mouse, and this will make the cube move scale up really large. Maybe something a little bit easier to see is if we changed it by a much smaller number when it's down here in the 0.001. So we can see if we want to fine-tune the numbers, we can do it like this. Now below the parameters pane is the node network. It contains all of the objects in the scene right now. You can see we've only got one object in the scene, right, which is our box object. Currently we're at the object level, or scene level. As you can see, it's written in the upper right corner of the network. And this is what you see by default when you open Houdini. There's several other networks, as well as several different layers of networks inside the object network. We're going to come back to this in a later lesson. It's a pretty big topic to cover in just an intro class. Now above the viewport is the shelves. That's right up here where we selected our box at the very beginning of the lesson. There's several different shelves in Houdini. You can see if you click on the name of the shelves, it'll toggle the options that you see underneath it. And all of the buttons on the shelf are just more or less shortcuts to doing certain things faster. For instance, when we clicked the button to create a cube, we also could have done it manually by placing it in the node network, like so. So if we have our mouse hovered over the node network and we hit the tab key, we can just type in the word box, and we see the box option appear. If we click on it and then click again to place it, we can see we've placed another box in the scene. I'm now going to introduce a couple more hotkeys. I promise this is the last one for the lesson, but it'll help you move objects around more easily in the scene. So currently the boxes overlap each other, so to see them better we're going to need to move the new one away. Now we could select the box here and then type in a different value for its translation, maybe put in 5, and if we zoom out we can see that the box has moved 5 units over, but it's going to be pretty tedious to change things like translation and rotation all the time just using the parameters pane. So I'll show you another way that you can move objects around in the scene. When you have it selected, there's some hotkeys that can come in handy that will help you do different things to your object. The S key will let you select any object that you have in the scene. The E key for any object selected brings up the scale tool. So we can see the Y, X, and Z scale tool here. If we click on one of the arrows and scale, we can see that the cube scales up and down uniformly. The R key is the rotation tool. So we can either rotate the cube freely along all axes by selecting it, or if we hover over one of the colored rings that encircles the cube, we can just rotate it on a single axis. Finally, the T key is what's going to help us move the cubes out away from each other. The T key is the translate tool. So if we select that and then maybe click on the X axis and drag it over, and then hold down on the Z axis and drag it back a little bit, now we've got our cubes separated. So just remember the S, E, R, and T keys are going to primarily be what you use to switch back and forth between different movement and translation keys. The last UI element that we need to talk about is the timeline. It's on the bottom of the screen, and the timeline lets us view any animations or simulations that we have in motion. Currently we have nothing moving, so we can't see anything if we hit play on the timeline. So let's set up a simple animation on this second box that we've created here so that we can see some animation. First of all, I'm going to just quickly reset the rotation value to 0, just so that it'll be a little easier to do the animations here. Okay, now with this box selected, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do something called setting a keyframe. So if I want to animate something, let's say I want to animate this cube moving up and down along the y-axis, I'm going to have to set a keyframe in one position, move the timeline, and set a keyframe in another position. To set a keyframe, all you have to do is find the parameter that you want to key. For this instance, I'm going to use the y position of this cube. Right-click it, go to Channels and Keyframes, and Set Keyframe. Now, there's an option in Houdini called auto key, and you can see it down here at the bottom to the right of your timeline. Your auto key may be turned on or off. If it's on, which mine is right now, any change you make for a keyframe value will automatically set a new keyframe when you change it. If auto key is off, you'll need to manually key each time you make a change, like we did when we set the first keyframe. It's usually a matter of personal preference, so for now we're going to go ahead and leave it on or turn it on if it's already off. You can toggle it on and off by just left-clicking the button. We are going to, now that we have the first keyframe set at frame 1, just click and drag on the timeline to maybe frame 48 or so, which would be 2 seconds in. Drag the cube up on the Y position, and you can see here in the translation parameter, the Y-axis value is green, and that means that there's a keyframe on this particular frame. If we click down on the timeline and scrub through, we can see now that our cube is moving up and down. Now, right-clicking, going to channels and keyframes, and then clicking set keyframe, it's a bit of a task to keep navigating through that menu every single time that you need to set a keyframe. So there's also a quicker way that you can set keyframes, and we'll do that by making the cube spin around on the Y-axis also. So if we want to set a quicker keyframe, let's say for the Y rotation, all you have to do is hold down the Alt key and click on the channel. You'll see it turned green, which lets us know that there's a keyframe. So we can now scrub through to, frame 48, set the Y rotation up a little bit, and now when the cube moves up and down, it also spins a little bit. If you maybe messed up your animation, or you want to take a keyframe away, you can hit right-click, go to Channels and Keyframes, and then scroll down to Remove Keyframe. Alternatively, you can hold the Control key and just left-click the parameter. Now let's also take a bit of a closer look at the node network. We still have a more in-depth lesson on this later, but it's going to be good to get a little familiar with it right now. Let's first start by making our animated cube hidden in order to make the scene a little bit cleaner. We could just delete the cube, but that only works if we don't ever want to see it again. Often we're going to want to hide parts of the scene while working on other parts of the scene in order to see what we're doing more clearly. This is going to be especially helpful when we're working on simulations and only want to view parts of the simulation. So to do that, if we make our network view a little more visible, all we have to do is select the blue eyeball icon on the object, and that will toggle its display off. I'll cover one thing real quick here, and that is we have two objects, both kind of named box, and it's a little confusing to know which one is which. We can rename nodes by just hovering over the text next to it, and then if you double click on it, it will let you change the name. So we'll call the first object that we made box1, and we'll call the second one box2. Now that we have a bit of a cleaner view of our scene, let's go ahead and double click on the box1 node. As you can see, nothing in the viewport changed, but something changed over here in our node network. We are now in the geometry level of the node network. What we're seeing is all of the surface operators for this particular piece of geometry. Knowing what level you are in the node network is very important, because different nodes are only available in specific levels. If you look at the top right of the network pane again, you can see which level you are in, which has now changed from scene to geometry. The navigation bar at the top will help you navigate to different levels of the network. So if we want to go back to the object network, all we have to do is click the word object, and now we're back to what we had before. But for now, we want to be in the geometry level, so let's go back in. In the geometry level, we can create nodes called surface operators, or SOPs. These modify properties of the geometry. Let's go ahead and add a surface deformer called a mountain sop. So to do this, we'll just hit the tab key, type in the word mountain, and then hit enter. If we click, we'll place the mountain node. Now just because we have the node here doesn't mean that it's affecting the cube. Right now the cube looks exactly the same as it did before, and that's because the box and the mountain are not connected yet. So to connect those two, we can hover over this input box on the mountain and click on it, and then connect it to the output of the box. They're now lined up and connected properly, but we're not actually going to see the deformation because of one more thing. Remember when we hid or unhid an object in the object view, we selected the blue eyeball icon for the visibility to the right of it, of the node. We have to do the same thing here in the geometry level too. So right now we're just viewing the box. If we want to see the box with the mountain sop, we have to click on the we have to toggle the display as well for the mountain. Okay, so we can see that it modified the box a little bit, but we're not getting a whole lot of deformation, and that is because we need to increase the surface divisions on the box. So let's just select the box, and up here in the parameters we can see that we have 2 axis divisions. I'm going to go ahead and middle mouse click it and drag it up, maybe to around 9 or 10. Now we can see that the mountain sop has deformed this object quite a bit, maybe a little too much. So we're going to click on the mountain and just change the height a little bit, maybe from 1 to 0.2. Alright, so now we have a box that is a little bit wavy and has a bit of a more jaggedy surface, the way that a mountain might look. Now using the visibility box on the node, we can also see what the cube looks like at any stage in the node network, and that's one of the biggest advantages to working in a node-based workflow like this. We can go back and make a change at any point in time. For instance, when we needed to change the axis divisions on the cube here, we didn't have to delete the mountain sop, change the axis divisions, and then make a new mountain. We could just go back to the box, change the number of divisions, and then see it update in real time. And if you ever need to go back to see what your object looked like at any step in the process, again, you can always click on the visibility checkbox, and you'll be able to see what the object looked like before you started adding the rest of the nodes. We can also create more pieces of geometry inside this box 1 piece of geometry. So let's go ahead and make a sphere and put it on top of the cube. So to do that, I'm going to hit the tab key, type the word sphere, hit enter, and then click in the node graph again to place the sphere. Now I'm going to click the visibility on the sphere so we can see it, and you can notice a bit of a problem right away, and that is we can't see the sphere and the box at the same time. Oops. And that's because of this visibility parameter. We can only have one checked at a time. Even if we select the sphere and move it up a little bit, we're still not going to see the box underneath it. So what we have to do is we have to make something called a merge node. And this merge node will be able to connect the box and the sphere to it. So if we select the mountain, put that as the first input to the merge node, and then we select this edit node, which this was just us editing the Y position of the sphere, and connect that to the merge node. Make the merge node visible. We can now see the sphere and the box at the same time. The sphere is a little large, so I'm going to go ahead and scale it down just a tiny bit. and then we'll move it back down to just sit right on top of the box. Now if we go back to the object level, our box and our sphere are treated as one object. So if you select the box here and maybe rotate it around a little bit, it's all acting as one grouped object together. The last thing we're going to look at are dynamic operators, or DOPs. These work in a similar fashion to surface operators, except these are for dynamic simulations. So making sure that we're back in the object level, we're going to select this box1 object, and we're going to navigate to the Pyro Effects shelf, which is on the right group of shelves. So if you just find Pyro Effects and click on it, you'll be in the Pyro Effects shelf. We're going to, with our object selected, click on the Flames button and wait a couple of seconds for Houdini to do its thinking. Once your object has disappeared and you now just see a little wispy smoke, we can actually play back this fire simulation. So if you hit the play button, it will play the animation forward. Now your computer may be slower or faster at playing back this pyro simulation than mine. So sometimes if you have a particularly complicated simulation, this may play back quite slowly at first, but Houdini usually does a good job of caching the simulation so that if you hit stop, rewind back to the beginning of the simulation, and hit play again, it will play back in close to real time. Now, as you see over here in the network view, we're no longer in the object view anymore. By clicking on the Flames button, it has automatically put us in the Dynamics view. But to see how to get there, we can just go back up to the object view. Zoom out a little bit. And now that view that we were in is this PyroSim node. It's disabled from view, but it's actually driving the Pyro import. So if we double click PyroSim, any dynamic node network is called a DOP network, and this controls the simulation. You can feel free to dig in and play around with the different options to see how it affects the simulation. Okay, that wraps it up for our first lesson, where we learned how to navigate the Houdini interface. In our next lesson, we're going to talk about the node network in greater detail, and we will learn how to do some basic modeling. Take care.